Right, good evening, everyone. Um, so before I start, I'm gonna kind of contextualize this a little bit, um, and that means that I'm gonna have to have a flashback. Whoa. Okay, anyone of a nervous disposition or anybody who's going to get freaked out, just evade your eyes right now. It's not a far cry from painting boring on a reproduction of a constable to burning some paintings. Now, I didn't have an opportunity to burn constables.
Yes.
Probably would have. I started making street actions. I started making performances in clubs.
All this period of absence, he'd been kind of haunting me with messages on the grapevine. He was doing some performances. Oh, really? Yes, he was on stage there with his trousers down and firing frankfurters out his ass into the audience.
I think in some way I was trying to deal with a lot of trauma that came out of the possibly also some things that happened before even the troubles went through my childhood. It's a form of deconditioning, as far as I can see. I wanted to decondition myself from all that stuff that had conditioned me as a human being. Right through my whole life, Protestantism, the whole bit, I was just taking too many drugs, drinking too much, kind of living this other kind of personality, which in fact became who I was. It defined who I was. So it was very difficult to break out of that. As a consequence of that, of course, it was slightly antisocial. So people find it very difficult to be or work with me. And so bit by bit, lots of things started falling apart. Personal relationships fell apart. Relationships with people who enabled my performance art to happen couldn't accommodate it anymore. It was a life-threatening situation, which miraculously I came out of, and I'm very grateful for that. But I almost didn't, and there are quite a few of my friends who didn't either. They're gone, they're dead. Okay, so there was this other part of my life for about 36 years where I was making performance art all over the world, everywhere. And then around 2008, I had a Creative Wales Award, which enabled me to take a year out. And I wanted to go back into painting. Now that coincided with an artist in residence commission in the new town of Craigavon in Northern Ireland. And I think they were expecting me to go there and make some kind of performance work. And I said I wasn't going to do that. I wanted to focus on painting. And I had been working back into painting because I'd originally started as a painter, back into painting through probably 5 years before that. but this enabled me to think about this experience I had, this accumulated experience of making performance and what that might mean in relation to painting. So the Craigavon work really set off a whole chain of interests and experiences for me. Things concerning absence and place and memory and identity. Craigavon's a very interesting place, not only because it's in Northern Ireland and what, everything's associated with that and the history is associated with that, but it's Northern Ireland's only new town, which allowed me to think about other new towns on mainland Britain. For instance, I started cycling around Craigavon, and there was lots of estates that had been bulldozed and knocked down. So you got these signs that didn't lead you anywhere, roads that didn't, which had sort of traces of habitation, but you weren't sure what happened there. So basically what I did was it was a kind of psychogeographical exercise of cycling around these 60 miles of cycle path and sort of mapping out my journeys and then making paintings which covered that up. So there was this kind of erasure of history, which is very much the way I felt about Northern Ireland and place and the memory of that. So I was using oil paint, very thick oil paint at the time. And I'm going to go through these quite quickly because I want to get to where we're going. But this is sort of context and background. So these were quite heavy. For instance, the one on the left, Brownlow, and was very much about passing by this green space on the bicycle. Whereas there were these underpasses which were redolent of maybe something much more sinister taking place, and trying to capture that through the surface. And my painting's always been about the surface and the physical contact with the surface and the materiality of paint on the surface and not having a relationship to the human body. So I'm whizzing away forward and thinking about this recent period during lockdown. And what preceded that? I'd done a number of works over the years in Britain's new towns, and I had another commission in 2018-19 as artist in residence in Skelmersdale, which is in Lancashire, near Liverpool. And I created I created a series of works called Newtown Reclamation. These were based on finding these concrete relief works. I'm interested in brutalist architecture as well, and concrete. That also in some way relates back to Northern Ireland and the use of concrete for divisions between communities, building walls, for instance. And these underpasses really interested me as well, as kind of these dark portals between places. So I discovered that these works were originally made by a guy called Mike Kaminsky, who was artist in residence from 1967 to 1977. And since then, they've just kind of been left there, and basically no one noticed these works anymore. So what I did was I basically cleaned them up and painted them. And people were kind of quite shocked by the emergence of these things, people who had lived there for a long time, walking their dogs and saying, I didn't see that. I've never noticed that before. So the idea of painting taken somewhere else, I'm always interested in where you push paint and what painting means. So painting the surface of something and reconditioning it or reclaiming it. So I discovered 3 of these pieces and over the next 2 years, 2018, 2019, myself and a group called Glassball, who were based who offered me the commission, we worked to get permission to clean these things up and reclaim them. And this is the last one. Also on the left-hand side, I found a number of photographs in the Lancashire archive of what they were like originally back in 1967. And this also involved members of the community as well, helping to paint these and clean them up. Right. A lot of this work was then combined and written about. I wrote about it in a book called Civics, which was published by Edge Hill University. And there was an exhibition of associated paintings that went with that. So here's what just happened before lockdown. Over the previous year, I visited 8 new towns throughout the UK and carried out a series of performative walks or drifts. The walks took place throughout town centres, housing estates, along pedestrian and cycle paths, through underpasses and upon streets and pavements. In each location, I pulled an etching plate attached to a piece of string behind me as I walked. This created an image of surfaces that would later be used for making a print. I also captured fragments of these walks on an iPhone, which later was edited into film. I think maybe there's a bit of film. I'm just going to pop back to that film. No, it's not allowing me to wind forward. Anyway, at the end of the film, there's a number of new towns listed. So there was 8 of these new towns, and they included Cumbernauld in Scotland, Cwmbran in South Wales, obvious ones like Harlow and Milton Keynes. So a whole load of these. Now, on the left-hand side here, you can see an etching plate that I made in Skelmersdale, Newtown, and a print made from that etching plate. So for me, the simultaneous perception of different spatial locations that emerged through the process offered a simple and direct communication with the physical environment. The performed activity of walking allowed multiple inscriptions to be etched into the plates. This provided fluctuations in surfaces to be recorded and historical data to be inscribed upon the plates. In this respect, I came to regard the particularity of the etching process as a direct transmitter of experience. What emerged was a continuous and layered dialogue between lived experience, memory, recall, and the direct physicality of the built environment, this kind of accumulation that was taking place. I suggested it's through the performed activity and its attendant and continuous act of etching that we might be drawn to a reactivation of memory in the spaces that we inhabited in a future past that once held all our utopias. Because, of course, the notion of a new time was this post-war idea of social utopianism. So I managed to produce 2 sets of prints, 2 editions from all these etching plates before lockdown. Those were a series of, an edition of 12 of each of Cumbernauld and Cwmbran. Which led me into Submerging, because the lockdown was so complete, I couldn't actually do anything else in terms of the printing. So when you're in the studio, you don't have to be a finished product all the time or make formal pronouncements. Work and love, the 2 best things flourish in studios for me. It's when you have to go outside and define everything that they often disappear. So this period of lockdown as a result of COVID, the COVID pandemic, has been a period of work and love and solitude and reflection through work and love. And through conversations with lots of friends, I think something was significant was happening in our lives that allowed us to look inward and take time and to take stock of where our lives were. And for me, it became the studio space because although we were in lockdown, I was living by myself. I could go to the studio, not be in contact with anyone, and be alone in the studio. So there was no chance of me transmitting whatsoever. The studio as a physical space for performance, the activity enabling me to work out all the issues and concerns I might have with the external world. So for me, this period of lockdown has been a kind of retreat, an intense period of reflection and action in order to keep in good mental and spiritual health. So, although I make paintings that are intentionally based on abstraction and as a deliberate provocation of figuration, my work has always been anchored in social, political, and quotidian experiences of reality. It depends on what form that reality takes, of course. I've always been acutely aware of our human construction and conceptual organization of this reality. For myself, this has always been a rather abstract, ambiguous, and contradictory. So as I couldn't make these prints during lockdown, I transferred those ideas, those experiences of mark making and the mark making process, which was accumulating on the etching plates, to painting. I just, before lockdown as well, I got an airbrush and a compressor, which I've never used before. So I translated this to painting, which allowed these kind of embodied actions to reveal themselves through an accumulation of mark making, employing fluid and disruptive gestures using the airbrush. As with learning how to use any new technology or application, it took me many long and frustrating days and weeks to become technically proficient enough to get the airbrush to do what I wanted to do. Which often in my case, when I'm engaging in something new in terms of a painting process, is to push it to its limit and probably do things you're not supposed to do with it. Because I always want to achieve some interesting or unexpected results. So basically I was accumulating the groundwork through accumulation of paint and painted marks. And really jamming the airbrush into the canvas, which meant that I kept breaking the damn thing and having to buy new parts. I wanted to scale up the painting as well. So this painting that I'm talking about in the studio, it's 3 meters. You know, it's a big space to use. I don't have any idea what I'm going to do beforehand in terms of painting. I just start and see where it's going to lead me. That's always the challenge. And I was thinking about the situation and COVID, obviously. And I was thinking about scale as being some kind of metaphor for that. How do I deal with the scale of this thing, of what was taking place in the world? I let the process lead me in order that I would not know what I was looking for until I had found it through what the process revealed, and therefore what the identities of the paintings were. As the paintings progressed, I would erase and build up layer upon layer, then blank out and apply new marks. The traces of inscription created a palimpsest and suggests a correlation to the topography of experience of the Newtown etchings. However, as the work developed, they increasingly equated more for me to a series of altered states, layers of interference, traces, absences, and presence that go beyond the current situation of lockdown, to question for me the validity and possible cessation of human life. That's a detail. Just before lockdown, I got Patricia McCormick's new book, The Human Manifesto, which had just been published before lockdown. McCormick's work concerns activism during the Anthropocene era, which is our current era. It's known as the Anthropocene era. McCormick argues for a new way of thinking that doesn't dissolve into nihilism and despair, but actively embraces concepts of human extinction, deep ecology, a refusal of identity politics, and the apocalypse as an optimistic beginning. There were also these geometric forms which were appearing, which also had a correlation, fairly obviously for me, to brutalism and the sorts of environments I'm talking about, not only in Newtowns, but that post-war concrete brutalist architecture. And also the kind of military installations that I grew up with in and around Belfast. So I started thinking about this and doing a bit of research about this and thinking about geometrics and mapping out geometrics and where this might kind of lead me. So in these recent works, the geometric forms sit within the painted ground, which acts as an interconnected and fluid landscape or environment. And as you can see in this painting, there are several masked out dimensions to it. So I was masking out areas, covering them up, and then painting a new area. So I didn't know quite what I was doing, and it created this kind of interdimensionality to it. And then this form emerging out of it, or on it, or in it. So these forms are abstract and ambiguous, even enigmatic. We're not sure if they are benign, what their relationship with other forms are. Are they architectural? Do they relate to zones of conflict? Or are they in some strange way transcendent? Some of the geometric forms that I was using were based on GPS satellite imagery of security sensitive and censored sites, some on memory and recall of modernist architectures. There are allusions to something solid, but also to structures collapsing, breaking down, pandemic interference, layers of paint, surface erasures, traces, and marks, suggesting things in transition. So in the studio, the experience of making this work during lockdown was one of merging the past and present, often haunted by other moments and other times that for me might suggest perhaps a rhizome of experiences that can lead to possible futures. So I don't wish to prescribe meaning to these works, but there's obviously something going on, and they are, I think, bit by bit living with these in the studios. They change as all painting does. I think the wonderful thing about being with painting is that it seems fixed, but it changes with your own experience, and it's really great to live with a painting and see this kind of formation of time and experience through the painting. It acts as a kind of conduit or transmitter for me. So I don't want to prescribe meanings, but these recent paintings suggest to me that through the process, and process is really important for me in the painting. As I say, I start from nothing, and it's a process. It's kind of almost like jumping over the edge and seeing where it's taking me. So the process of the performed activity of painting over many weeks in isolation and solitude during lockdown, it may be possible to arrive in a new space or territory, a place that has not yet been discovered, and to go beyond our fear of the unknown. So this was a series of works made during lockdown, and then these got translated into newer works. So I'm still in a kind of transitional period from these, but I'm probably going to finish off this with just mentioning this. Also during lockdown, a lot of artists were having a really difficult time, and it was great to see artists selling work at low cost on Instagram, for instance, to help support themselves. I'm okay, I've got a job, that's great, but it's like, well, what am I doing to help support this? So I talked to Kat Gardner, my gallerist in Cardiff, and I suggested that we take a bunch of studies I was doing, little paintings basically, on little MDF paintings on MDF board. And we just sell a bunch of them really cheap to make some money. So then we could give to a Welsh or Wales-based painter to help support them through this difficult time. So then I was thinking, well, how do we do that? Then what do we do with the money? Do I just give it to someone? But I thought, well, actually the idea would be to talk to Beep Painting Biennale. And I talked to Jonathan. I said, look, what about making this an award for a Wales or Welsh-based painter? And we could actually announce it during Beep. So BEEP opens on Saturday, the 3rd of October. And the announcement will be made that £1,000 from the sale of these paintings will go to a Wales or Welsh-based painter. And Jonathan was very kind in working through all the applications and the painters and paintings that are going to be in BEEP, and to allow me to see all the Welsh-based painters. And Kat Gardner and I talked about, well, which ones do we think really merit having the award. So someone has been chosen that will be introduced on Saturday. Let me just, okay, I'm just going to finish with a couple of more recent ones. So this is a canvas 200 by, it's not 5170 centimeters, it's 170, the ridiculous size. So it's 2 meters high. So still doing large paintings and still thinking about these forms floating in space. And also recently, during August, I was looking at the Ferndale estate in Penrhys in South Wales in the Rhondda Valley. I'm thinking about, you know, those sorts of communities which are kind of marginalized, and, you know, so a lot of the houses reminded me of Craigavon, a lot of empty houses. Penrhys has a whole history of, you know, drug abuse and being a sink estate and stuff like that. Although things are really, it looks like things are changing because people are actually doing up some of the houses. So I wanted to just make a short series about that. And I started thinking about also post-industrial landscapes in South Wales in terms of that. So these are more recent works. A couple of those. Okay, I'm gonna come out of this now. Okay, back again. Question time. God, that was quick, wasn't it? Okay, anybody got anything to say? Bring it on.
I do.
Hi, Jude.
Hi. So could you talk a little bit about the relationship of your performance work and the performative act? I mean, it's obvious when you're doing the etchings, you know, dragging the etching plates through the new towns. But in terms of the other paintings that you shared with us, do you feel like, or how much of an influence do you feel like your performative work is or is involved in the making of those pieces? Or like, where do you place that?
I think it's completely enmeshed in it. You know, it's a lot of the gestural marks with the airbrush, especially. You know, there's a lot of movement on those big canvases. So the canvases, the 3 meter ones, become this whole kind of performance surface for me. You know, and I'm often attacking it and moving back from it. And I'm also erasing stuff as well. So there's layers built up. So I'm whiting out areas and then attacking it again. And kind of getting into the space of, you know, what these memories about. Things keep coming up or kept coming up during lockdown. I'm very, very emotional states. At times I would be kind of slumped on the floor. And I'd be in a really dark space, and then I would have to get up and make a movement to kind of get going again. And then I find myself crying about stuff, being very emotional about it. So for me, that, in a way, it equates to a lot of those sensations and experiences I was having when I was making live performance and with audiences. For me, going back into the studio, and the reason why I went back into painting out of performance was that I didn't want that public. Somehow I felt that the public scrutiny was getting in the way sometimes of what I was doing. Not all the time, but there would be something else. It would kind of shift something in the live experience, which didn't feel quite right. That the focus was kind of being shifted by the audience.
So I was just going to ask you. Well, that was my next question.
Because in the studio, I'm totally focused you know, and it's a way of meditating or contemplating situations and allowing that to be quite physical. But then there's a kind of combination, because there's a physical ground that's going on that movement with the airbrush. But then there are these geometric forms which take a lot of kind of construction and thinking about color. And so often I'm working through those quite methodically, where sometimes the color is changing radically from day to day, and I'm repainting them, you know, and quite a lot actually to get the right feel, until it actually somehow feels like it's revealed itself as the way that it should actually be.
So it sounds like there's a strong element of like catharsis, which there also is in your performance work. That was sort of my question, of like the difference between that process when you're by yourself, right?
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that it's extended time as well, because towards the end of my performance career, I was making longer durational performances, and there was quite a lot of it was static or very slow moving, which also relates back to, for instance, my tutor at art school was Ulster McLellan, who studied Zen, and his work is very, I mean, his work nowadays is almost like totally static, or he's sitting on a chair for hours on end, you know. But there's this sense of focus, you know, it draws in. And I wanted that focus in the studio. I have that focus, because there are times when there isn't much activity. So I think we equate, I think I equate catharsis with like, you know, something completely violent and, you know, physical and aggressive. And that isn't necessarily always the case with what's happening in the painting studio. You know, there can be a stillness. There's certainly a stillness in between the episodes of painting bits on a painting.
Right. That makes sense.
But for me, it's like, I find working in the studio, I can only say it's a profoundly spiritual experience. That's why I come back to talking about what I was talking about, you know, work and love. Because for me, they're together, you know, they're the same thing, work and love. You know, work is love made visible. And it's about love. Whatever that might mean at that particular time, or what it becomes, you know, there's a sense of love and connection to something.
Yeah, I got the sense when you were talking near the beginning that like all of those processes and elements of your studio practice, which I think is true for a lot of artists, like it all got very much amplified through being in lockdown. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think well, for me, it still is, you know, because we're still doing it. You know, I'm still having those experiences, and it's a difficult balance, because I'm a very social person. I'm also a very physical person. I like being around people, and I like the physicality of people, and people who know me know that I'm a bit of a hugger and all that, you know. So I really do love being around people. But at the same time, I need that contemplation, that meditative space that lockdown allows me. So the not so good stuff is not being around people, because I haven't been around people physically. Most of my work now is all of it's online, and most of my interactions with people is through Zoom or FaceTime or whatever, you know. So I do miss the physicality of people. You know, I mean, going to the supermarket doesn't do it for me, I'm afraid.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Depending what neighborhood you're in, right?
Yeah, like your neighborhood.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Would you say obsession is a huge element about making practice during lockdown? Can you hear me? Sorry.
I'm looking for the view. I'm trying to find out who I'm talking to.
Oh, I haven't got a picture up.
All right. Who is it?
Rebecca.
Rebecca.
Okay, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Rebecca, which Rebecca? Tima?
Yes.
Oh, right, Tima. Okay, right. So what was the question?
Would you say that obsession is a huge part of making work during lockdown? I find that it was almost on an obsessive state where I couldn't put down anything. I would just overdo everything.
Mm, that sounds like you, Tima. Yeah. In a nice way.
Oh, well, I had a new baby as well.
Well, okay.
Gave birth during there. So it was a bit, I guess it was a tie between the two things. But
Well, obsession. Yeah, I can only speak for myself, but being an artist, yeah, I think being an artist, you have to be quite obsessive about something, or you channel energies into something. Obsession sounds like it's some kind of strange neurotic state. I don't mean it to be like that. I think obsessed.
I mean it more as an addiction rather than obsessive.
No, it's not. I don't know about addiction. Well, work can be an addiction. Anything could be an addiction, couldn't it?
That's true.
Not for me. I'm very clear about my discipline. I put in the hours and I'm disciplined about it, but I go to the studio at a certain time and I come home at a certain time. I don't overstretch it. I've learned that if I overstretch it, it's usually not very good. And I feel depleted and exhausted by it. And I come back the next day and it just looks like shit, you know.
Do you feel that the sort of constant state of posting rather than direct communication has had some sort of an effect on your practice currently?
Or because you think I've been obsessively posting?
Oh no, I'm not saying that. The obsession was all about me, really. I was just wondering if it had that sort of effect on you. No, it's a completely different question. So it was just, how do you feel it sort of affected your practice, sort of exhibited in this way, I suppose?
It's interesting, isn't it? Certainly, I'm aware much more of other artists' work through Instagram, and there seems to be, definitely an accumulation of works, and it's good to see that. Certainly, we have the new students in this week, and younger generation. They're complete. We did an induction this week. And the induction was via Instagram, where they created work specifically for and through Instagram, and then created an exhibition channel. And then they're going to use Art Steps tomorrow to actually place some of that into a constructed exhibition space. So I think actually, you adopt. We're human beings. We adopt and we find ways of talking about ourselves. I mean, it might come back to some ideas about being an artist, because I think as an artist, and certainly as the sort of artist I am and possibly have always been, it's about I have a sense it's about me showing off, basically. And there's a lot of ego attached to that, and I have to be really careful about that. But it's kind of like showing off, like, look what I can do! Wow. Did this exist before, I quite like that. It takes you by surprise, And I think, if you can see the humor in that and maybe even the irony in that, then it's okay. You get a balance.
Yeah.
But, I think if one is obsessively posting on Instagram just to be liked, you're on a no-brainer or no-winner, definitely, it's that's another addiction, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I think they're built to be addictive, aren't they?
Yeah, but it's like anything, you have to have balance, and it's moderation in all things, even moderation.
Yeah. Okay.
I just want to add, tie that back into
You're muted.
Okay. What the question that I asked you about, well, you kind of answered before I had asked it, in a sense, the difference between the performative element in your painting as opposed to doing live art with an audience present and how that affects your process. But that her question about, you know, how much does posting say on Instagram, like I'm aware of that as an artist now in this way of like, if I know I'm going to be posting, it can actually be like there's this unknowable, unknown audience sort of sitting on your shoulder because while you're in process, because you know you're going to be, I mean, I guess you could say that about all work that you make, right? But with Instagram, it's so, and social media, it's so immediate. Like, do you feel that much or at all? Or, you know?
Well, you're aware of where the audience is and why you're doing it. For instance, and you know, I agree that, you know, as artists or as painters working in the studio, I think there's a lot of self-watching, and you're constantly working with context, and you're constantly, you know, that whole history is sitting on your shoulder of Western, you know, the Western canon of painting is just sitting there, you know.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like, how do you get rid of that? It's like the Cage thing, you know. Cage said that, you know, if you get into the studio, you take the whole world with you and all your friends with you. And as you begin the process of working bit by bit, they seem to leave. And if you're really lucky, you leave. And I think that's the point that I want to get to. And you know, thankfully, you know, I do get there pretty much most days when I'm in the studio, but it takes a little bit of, you know, the world kind of disappearing or dissolving away somehow. I think with the Instagram, yeah, you're aware of what the audience says. And I think the latest stuff I posted on the Instagram where I'm destroying works, in particular from 2013, as I was going through the studio looking at works, I was thinking, wow, that was a really bad painting year. You know, why are these still sitting here? You know, so then I started making those short clips and putting those on Instagram. I thought they were entertaining and quite funny, you know, destroying these really not very good paintings, you know, but kind of making a big deal about it, you know. So they're sort of slightly ironic, you know, like I really don't care too much about these paintings, but you're not supposed to slice up canvases, right? Oh my God, look what he's doing, you know, sacrilege.
Was I right in seeing that it seemed like there was less response to those posts than you have had other posts? And I was like, are people not upset by it? Like, is it too much for people to deal with because it's such a no-no, or they don't know? Yeah. Did you think that? Did you notice that?
I don't know.
I found I sometimes didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to say. I would go to write something, and I was just so in between, distraught, crying, maybe enjoying it. I didn't know what to respond with, to be honest. Are you going to keep the frames?
Well, yeah, the stretcher bars are like worth a bit of money. I mean, they're
exactly
really good Russell and Chapel exhibition bars. You know, what are you talking about? No, hold on a minute. The worst bit about it, you know, cutting the canvases up is reasonably easy, except some of those paintings from that year are really thick oil paint and they're dried really hard. And my hands are just scratched to hell with them, you know, cut all over. So that's quite difficult sometimes. But the worst part is you have to take all the blinking staples out of the back of them and clean them up, you know. Yeah. It's not that easy to get rid of them.
I enjoyed the circle cutting the most, I think. There was something about this sort of cutting it into a circle and kind of popping it through. I was like, oh, that's good. There was only one of those though. I was like, oh wow.
Yeah.
Because it seems like an artwork unto itself when you make it into a circle, right? Yeah.
Anybody else got questions? We want to hog this conversation. What do we got here?
More about concrete, really, Andre. Kind of as someone myself, I'm kind of in love with kind of the old the concrete, the old concrete buildings, and concrete as a sculptural material, really. Even though, like, you know, I'm a painter, a lot of my stuff's about concrete and the structures, you know, concrete blocks and things like that. Yeah. I've never really thought about working with concrete myself. I was wondering, when you were like kind of cleaning up the kind of the concrete reliefs in earlier, whether you kind of had any thoughts about working with that material?
Well, I have worked with that material, but in another context, because I worked in building sites throughout the 1980s and early 90s. So I worked with concrete a lot. I have to say, not really doing anything much creative with it, just floors and buildings or whatever, or mixing foundations, stuff for foundations. But I've always been fascinated by it, fascinated about how you construct out of concrete and, how it's reinforced, how you put the metal in it and stuff like that. But I think for me, the concrete goes back to, it's this odd kind of conflict for me of something that is new and kind of this wonderful material that you can build these amazing structures out of. I mean, you look at brutalism in the Soviet Union and you look at some of those buildings, they're extraordinary. I mean, a lot of them, the concrete wasn't very well mixed, so they're falling apart now, which is unfortunate. But as architecture, really absolutely extraordinary. And there's enough brutalism around the world still surviving that I'm absolutely in love with. But it's like there's this kind of relationship where it veers into something military or something a bit more sinister. And that's always the kind of interest for me. I mean, it goes back also to some earlier experiences in my life where the Ulster Museum in Belfast was an old Victorian, Greco-Roman Victorian edifice with pillars and stuff. But in the late 60s, they put a concrete bunker type thing on the back of it. And it was opened in 1970. So I was about, 12-year-old or something. I went to see this thing. And it was just mind-blowing, this big concrete thing in the back of this building. It was just so odd, And I didn't really quite understand it. But the concrete was new for me. And the inside of the building was new for me. And also what they were putting in the new galleries in that building was completely new. They had an amazing curator who was buying up this really contemporary work. And there was a lot of big paintings, Rosenquists and stuff like that going into it. And so it equates with a kind of nostalgia in that sense for me as well, There's a kind of sentiment involved there. But,
yeah, I mean, I used to work a lot in the building trade and stuff, and so kind of spent many an hour and mixing concrete, and it was it's very much a very hypnotic thing, just looking into the cement mixer for hours on end and looking at this stuff slush around and how you could control it, and and it's beautiful stuff, and I always get a bit despondent when they rip these things down. We recently in Swansea, where they rip everything down anyway, there was the old Oceana building on the Kingsway, which was this ugly, I thought beautiful, this hulk, this it looked like the hulk of a ship. And it was just sat there, this grey monstrosity. But there was something so beautiful about it. It was like a blank canvas, I felt, which they should have elaborated on. They could have built a glass structure around it and kind of really gone to town on it. And they knocked it down. And it was I love concrete. It's great. Anyway, there you go.
I'm with you there. Yeah,
It is good stuff.
Nice bit of concrete. What have we got here? I see Amy there, Amy Goldring. What have you got to say for yourself?
Hello, nice to see you. I haven't talked to humans for about 6 months, so this is like quite mad, really. I just got back to the studio because I've just finally got the kids settled in school, and for me, my practice is going to change because I can't get out in the field. I usually like to work in the landscape and from the model, so the visual information that I'm taking in, I'm not sure where I'm going to get that from. And I was wondering, like, with you being in lockdown, did you take in different or less information, and like how did you overcome that in how the forms emerged in your painting? Like, did it affect it, and if it did, how did you overcome it?
Well, as I said, I often feel that I'm always in process. So I carry a lot of stuff with me continuously. And those etching plates, they just seem to fold into this idea of using the airbrush. I didn't quite know what I was going to use this airbrush for anyway. It was just kind of, I think the material suggested ways of working and where it was taking me. So I was just being led by that. There was no forward thinking or no plan about it. I was just responding to the situation. So, it was probably quite an emotional response as well.
Yeah, I think what you said about kind of falling off the cliff, it might be a new challenge in my own practice to be less reliant from responding to what I'm, working from in my immediacy, and just kind of allowing something to emerge a little bit more.
I guess the stimulus is always with me, depending on, what I'm reading, because I read all the time, and I'm kind of immersed in stuff all the time. And so I guess it's just this ongoing idea that you're always researching, I'm just inquisitive all the time. That's never left me. I don't know why I'm like that, maybe that's what artists do, but I'm just inquisitive about stuff. I'm interested all the time. I mean, I have to say sometimes to my detriment, because it can often go, over there and then over there suddenly. And sometimes it loses its focus, and I have to kind of bring it back. And it's like it can go into a whole body of work that just leads me up a dead end, So, but I think it's important to go there for me. I can't speak for anyone else, but it always teaches me something. I always sort of come back. It's like an explorer. I sort of come back with stuff, and I don't quite know what it is, what I've come back with, and then I'll find it popping up later on, that experience.
Yeah, I kind of have stacks of books split into different sections that I'm reading bits of all the time, and I think in painting it's like organising those bits of information into constellations. That's kind of how I'm able to process all these different things that I'm curious about and looking at, and they kind of only come together when I'm painting. So it's more living in a mental landscape, I guess, that's might come out in the work rather than being out there so much.
And perhaps that's the environment, the mental and physical environment that we're each of us in now. We're dealing with these spaces. I mean, I'm very grateful that I actually have quite a big studio to work in. I think I would go a bit nuts if it was like in my bedroom or somewhere. I don't know why, but I'm sure something would come out of that as well.
Yeah, for me, it's kind of felt like early childhood again. I think I lived a lot in my imagination in my early childhood, and it's been like that, I guess.
Wow, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Maybe there's stuff there, that's amazing.
Yeah. Well, it's been kind of liberating to be able to just freely be an introvert in some ways, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Great. Lovely.
Nice to talk to you.
You too. Nice to see you. Haven't seen you for a long time.